Amy Gillam from Turley. A question for Kate. I thought there was a very powerful way to, I suppose, summarise what we've been talking about this afternoon with regards to housing need. And I was specifically interested in regards to what you and Notting Hill Group are doing with regards to delivering housing, particularly as you're mentioning around the role of outer London and higher density. Is that the particular direction that you see things going in?
From Invent. Really a question probably directed at anyone in the panel, but it was Kate that gave me the idea. This whole issue around affordability for young people, I can remember exactly the same debates happening in the late 80s. In fact, I can remember when I first came back to London from university, I lived in a squat. Now, it had its ups and downs, but entertaining someone in a single bed isn't all bad. But the point I'm making is that the market, to a degree, corrected itself, but people of my generation who got caught in that housing bubble in the 80s, it corrected itself, and we were able to get back on the housing ladder maybe 10 years later. It wasn't brilliant for a few years, but it did correct itself. And I can say now that if I was to let out my kitchen on the website that you said as a potential bedroom to someone, it would be quite spacious and luxurious.
Right, well, we're very pleased for you, obviously. But I think Kate was making the point about entertaining people in a single bedroom, not in a single bed, just to be clear. I don't want words put into her mouth. Who else is trying to come in? Yes, madam?
Fascinating facts and also figures to look. And Kate, you touch the simple facts I always been fighting for young people and housing and dealing with these sort of tremendous, troublesome young people. However, I'm just wondering what's the panel's real thoughts about selling housing association properties or right to buy scheme, whatever, when we have such a huge crisis of not building new homes to support the similar facts.
We've talked a lot about housing, but we haven't really compared the situation in other countries, which we can use as model. I'm from Singapore myself, and there we have the Central Provident Fund. You might have heard of it. It's like national insurance, where it can be used to buy a property. And then look at Germany. There's such a strong rental market. In the US, they have all sorts of rental schemes, gated development to swimming pools, which are actually quite cheap. You know, obviously they have more land. But we do a lot of discussion, but we seem to be navel-gazing and not looking at outside models.
Great, thank you very much. As those who don't know Singapore, the Central Provident Fund is not only your pension, your mortgage, your educational maintenance grant, it's also your national insurance, and it pays for your health care at the same time, and you carry it throughout your life. So you're next. Are you two waiting to come in as well? Okay, we'll get the microphone to you. You're next.
I'm interested in what the panel think about the proposition that London's housing market is silted up. Actually, you can't really move, there's no mobility because people are locked into where they happen to live. And much as we talk about communities being several generations old, often there's quite a lot of transition in those places.
Kat Evans, 2 questions. First question, I really liked the comment about change of behaviour, and I wondered if anyone, in particular Mark, had any ideas how he envisioned that change could be brought about. And the second question, a lot of the presentations today have been looking at housing, the burden on London, and it's been discussed, touched on several times about how maybe this is to do with work opportunities outside London. Does anyone have any ideas how work opportunities could be created outside of London? Decentralisation.
Okay.
And I suppose that also touches on devolution as well.
Now, this panel was, of course, about high-quality design. We seem to have come back to housing. Never mind. Let's deal with what we can. Why don't you take 2 questions each, and we'll try to draw it together that way. Debbie, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to, although I suspect my colleagues will be able to respond on the majority of the questions far better than being about housing, as you rightly point out. A couple of points from my perspective, though. I mean, outer London, I talked about town centres a lot, and if you look at the London plan and the opportunity areas which have been mentioned today, they are in outer London, and there is an awful lot of scope within those areas. I guess what we need to understand is the reason why some of those areas are sort of galloping forwards and some of them are still on the blocks. So, and that's a process that we're moving through at the moment. But there are some areas that we're working very successfully in partnerships with the local authority and developers on. So take Croydon and Tottenham as being very much top of our list, but obviously Old Oak as well is coming forward now as well. The other point on the silted up question on the housing markets is perhaps more of a personal perspective, but I was struck by comments earlier today about London's housing market being a fortress. And I do hold this view that once you're on the property ladder, you sell and buy in the same market. So you're sort of okay. The problem is getting on that ladder. And then my only other sort of comment as well is in terms of, I totally take the point that there's some really inappropriate housing options being taken by young people, but also the positive side of that is there's some really innovative models, often digitally enabled, for people to get into London, access the jobs and access the London economy. And I think it would be really good to capture the good of those at the same time of making sure it's not exploiting people as well. So I think there's just some quite innovative and interesting things happening. We heard about the sharing economy earlier today. So I wouldn't want to lose the good, but I totally accept that there's some sort of bad behaviour that's driving to.
So to differentiate between very poor living standards and exploitation versus actually just using the existing asset base a bit better through digital platforms.
And enabling opportunities for people to come into London. Yeah,
great, okay. Mark, let's come to you for a couple of remarks.
Well, I shouldn't let the changing behaviour one go unanswered, so I will start there. I guess for me, it's about the communication and it's understanding the nature of the environment, and I mean that in its wider sense, that we're working and that people are living. And really this understanding that we can't extrapolate trends from the past to understand what the future will be like. And I think this whole issue of lifestyles and where people work and the time that it takes them to commute, actually, if we sit here in 15, 20 years' time, will be largely irrelevant. The way people work, the way they use the space, whether some people even need a kitchen in their flat anymore, will be completely different. And I do think that that sharing economy will also change that. If we explain that and design with that in mind, then what we're looking at is more functional master planning rather than spatial master planning. We're looking for the fixes early on in the planning system to be what are the fixes on the outcome, not what is the fix on the typology. And I think that is then will drive the behavioural change within design.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, Kate, lots of comments were made in relation to what you said. Why don't you respond to those?
I'll try and do this quite quickly. The question really about, is that what Notting Hill is doing, working in the outer London areas? That is true, but it isn't easy to get what I described, which was relatively urban type housing in places like Erith, for example. The town centre issues that you were talking about earlier and the regeneration of council estates seem to me to be great opportunities to produce low-cost housing, but it is just really difficult. That's what I'm saying. There's low availability of land. A lot of land gets sold virtually off plan to often international buyers, and our ability to find places to develop affordable homes is getting very much squeezed, and I think we're one of the best teams in London at doing that, and we're finding it hard. We do a lot of cross-subsidy to keep the price down, and the amount of new government grant in a new home is about 10%. So it's a very, very low amount of government money going in, and as a result, we're charging relatively high rents now for that basic social housing. Instead of it being about £100 a week, it's now about £200 a week, which begins to make it relatively inaffordable for low-income workers. And that worries me, the price that we're renting it out for. I love the German model. I talked to some German housing people only the other week, And I mentioned that a lot of our young people are spending 50% of their income on their housing. And the German people said 15, and I said, no, 50. They said, oh, in Germany, that's illegal. They have a cap of 22%, I think, of your income that can be spent on housing. Well, our housing is so expensive here relative. I think, you have to bear in mind, it's the housing cost relative to the low wages that is very, very particular to Britain. And I think when you throw childcare costs into that as well, that's when you have this utterly sort of toxic mix of squeezing out exactly the people that we want to be here. As I say, I'm very worried about it and don't know where that's going to go. London has, enormous housing wealth. And for the families that have wealth, as you were just mentioning, they can sort out their next generation just about by giving them deposits towards their homes. But it's that great housing wealth of London that is held in the public sector, whether it's the land that the poor estates are on, or whether it's public land in the hands of the NHS or other government bodies. This wealth of London has to be used for our ordinary people. And if they don't have the bank of mum and dad, it's got to be the bank of the public wealth that has to help them. Otherwise, we will not have a mixed and dynamic community here, and that will be the death knell of London. Should we provide jobs elsewhere? I mean, I saw something in Local Government Chronicles saying that Parliament should move to Hebden Bridge. Well, why not? Let them see something about what the rest of the world lives like, and let's spread some of it out. But at the end of the day, our young, dynamic people are not going to be able to settle here, and they're going to have to go somewhere else. And if it's Edinburgh or Manchester, that's great. But equally, look at all of Europe. There are people who complain about the wide range of Europeans coming here. Why don't we make sure our young people learn some languages and go and take up? Fantastic opportunity to do a degree in Denmark or set up a business in Spain. It doesn't all have to be done in London. London's a cool place, but so is Berlin, etc. So I think we have to change our mindset. That does go back. Just on right to buy, I think there's a lot in the government's plans for housing, and the more worrying one for me is the welfare reform, which means that our poor customers are going to have their incomes cut significantly. The in-work benefits will go, the disability benefits, the child tax credits, and the housing benefit are all under attack. And that will mean that the very poor will find it much more difficult to survive in London. And I think that's what's really worrying me. If we sell a home or two to better off tenants, get the cash in and rebuy something with it, that's not a major issue for me. The fact that local authorities might have to subsidise that is a problem. I do think to expect the big discounts being offered to come from the sale of expensive council housing isn't a good use of resources, but that's my opinion.
Thank you all very much.